G'day and welcome. It's Mark Bailye here from OpenLMS. And again, as always, we love talking to you about technology and how it can be used to enhance and enrich the learning experience. And today is really no exception. We've got a great topic in accessibility, and our approach is going to be just a four-step process to go through this today. We're going to look at some context to sort of set the scene around what we're going to talk about. We're then going to move into some of the challenges that people are having around accessibility. We're then going to look into some concepts around universal design for learning very briefly, which will then set the scene for our focus for the rest of the webinar, which is really what's that like in practice? How do you get the most out of OpenLMS? And more importantly, how do you create and deliver content that's accessible to everyone? We couldn't help but acknowledge that today is a Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So it's great that you're all able to join and really talk and think and learn about digital access and inclusion. And in this case, while I'll be doing the majority of the talking, there will be a chance at the end for questions. And hopefully through this, you're actually taking the time to actually learn a few things as well as we go along. Well, just to highlight the importance of our topic today is just to show that 15% of the world, or 1 billion people, are estimated to live with some form of disability. When we narrow that down a little and think about the Asia and the Pacific regions, then that's 1 in 6, or 690 million people, are estimated to live with some form of disability. When we come and focus again on Australia, we see it's still the same ratio of 1 in 6, but it's 4.4 million people are estimated to live with some form of disability. So when we think about those statistics and numbers, as we see from this picture here, really what we're talking about is, and I love the caption here, clearing a path for people with special needs clears the path for everyone. So as we think about the challenges that we're all facing in terms of how we go about our learning, whether it's in corporate around learning and development, whether it's in the education sector where we're focuses around learning and teaching, what we need to realize is that as we come together and think about how we can enhance that learning and teaching process, or that learning and development approach, if we think about not from our own perspectives, but the perspective of everyone else. So how do we create content? How do we deliver content that everyone can access? And if we focus on the everyone, then whether people have disabilities or not, they also will be able to access the content that we're delivering. And more importantly, for everyone, they're going to be able to personalize the way in which they digest that material, because they have the flexibility to choose the specific learning types, the learning approaches that best suits the way they learn. And from an educational perspective, as we're putting this content together, that's really, really important to keep in mind, that what we're creating is for everyone, and that's really important. So when we think about accessibility and inclusion, what we need to think about is really how do we give equal access and opportunities to everyone wherever possible. And if we think for a moment in the education space, that's really about what can we do to reduce the barriers that might occur. Now, we know there might be barriers that prevent people from accessing digital content. Maybe it's the learning and teaching activities that we're putting together. Perhaps it's an assessment task. And to be honest, when we think of the corporate world, that those areas are very similar, whether it be digital content, the learning activities that are taking place, or the assessment task. So again, this topic is relevant for all of us, and we know that because there's a lot of challenges that all of us are facing. So one question I want you to think about is, what challenges are being faced in higher education when trying to deliver a barrier-free learning experience for all? So what are the challenges? And again, similarly, we could say that and rephrase that to say, well, what are the challenges faced in corporate? And I'm sure that many of you are from one of those sectors would know that there's a number of challenges that you're currently facing. And if we just think for a moment here in Australia, what we can see, particularly in higher education, is just over 9% of people that are studying, whether it be at a university, whether it be at a TAFE, or whether it be at other educational institutions, at least 9% have some form of disability that those who are delivering the learning need to take into consideration. And that's important to note. And so when we think about these people that are attending these types of institutions, what we also need to remember that this 9% are really only those who fully disclose that they have some form of disability. We know from the literature that that number of 9% is in fact probably quite higher, as we know that there are people that don't necessarily disclose that they have some form of disability. And when we think about the major disability categories, you know, whether it be visual, whether it be hearing or motor, or whether it be a cognitive disability, we know that people have at least one of these or perhaps other disabilities that does place a burden on the way in which they access the learning and teaching or the learning and development. And so as educators or trainers, we need to think about, how do we deliver our content? How do we deliver our learning that's accessible for everyone? And so as we think about that, we also know that we have available to us technology tools. And yes, we can apply those technology tools, but in reality, that's not enough. As educators, we need to really change the way we think. We need to think about how we design our courses with the intention of helping every student. That means, how do we design our courses effectively so that the learning that's taking place is accessible to everyone? How are we able to achieve that as we go about designing our technologies? And that's really what we want to think about. We want to think about how we can do that well. What that means is thinking outside our personal experiences and our perceptions, thinking about what it means to create content that everyone can access. So what does that mean? It means we need to rethink how we create our courses. So when we think about those that might be visually impaired, we need to think about those learners who need text-based alternatives to consume visual content. We need to think about the learners who need captions and transcripts or alternative audio. We need to think about learners who need content formatted for keyboard and assistive technologies. And we also need to think about the learners who need multiple modes of information and clutter-free experience. And as I look at those things, there's certainly a lot of those that naturally appeal to my learning style. And it would be great if I was, because of the way in which the learning was delivered, I could adapt and change and digest content that was in line with my personal preferences. So that's really important to note. So as institutions and corporations start to think about accessible content, what I'd like you to think about is this approach, and think about, where are you in this journey? Are you at that sort of very start, at that initiating phase where you actually don't even have a strategy in place? Perhaps you're still in the planning stages. Or for some of you, have you moved on from initiating and now in that development stage where you are putting together strategies for inclusion and are being developed and piloted? So you're in that phase. Or have you progressed even further into the establishing phase, where you've got strategies in place that are institutionalized, that you've got policies, you've got your strategic plans that you've implemented, but the implementation is limited at the moment for a variety of reasons? Or 4, have you progressed so far that you now feel as though you're in that championing space at the end, where you've got your strategies in place, they're implemented, and they're implemented across the corporation or institution. They're large scale, they're in full swing, and your strategy is in place. So just have a think about where you're in those stages: initiating, developing, establishing, or championing. For those of you that are on this webinar, we're going to probably spend a lot of the content that we're talking about is probably relevant for that sort of initiating, developing, establishing stage. So it's great that you can hang on and listen to what we've got to say. So again, as we think of those stages, we've already mentioned that we really need to think about the content that we're creating and the need to think outside our personal experience and perceptions. And one of the ways that we can do that is to, as we think about how we rethink and reimagine our courses that we're designing, we can start to do so by going back to the roots of universal design for learning. And again, if this is a term that's new to you, then let me give you a brief overview of what it is. Universal design for learning is really a set of principles around curriculum development. It's a set of principles that give all individuals equal opportunities to learn. And so what UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, is, it's really a blueprint of how you go about creating goals, how you go about creating materials, activities, assessments that you design and create and deliver, that in some way everyone is able to access. That's what universal design for learning is. And if you remember that comic strip I put at the very start around that person clearing the snow off steps, which is only means that some people can get access into the building. Had he cleaned the ramp, then everyone could get access to the building. So that's the sort of concept that we're talking about here. And we know that universal design for learning is really a framework designed to improve learning and teaching, again, for all people, and we know it's based on scientific insights into how humans learn. And there's really three key areas around that. The first of those is engagement, where it's all about the why of learning. So really thinking about, as we're creating courses, how are we going to stimulate interest and motivation for learning? How are we going to do that with our learners? Then the second area is around representation. So thinking about the what of learning. So as we think about our learners, how are we going to present information and content in different ways to them? And then the third area is this idea of action and expression. It's really the how of learning. So thinking about how do we differentiate the way students can express what they know. And so it's really important that as we think about those three things, that's going to be the foundation really for what we're going to move on and talk about, which is how do we now put this into practice? When we're designing our courses, what do we think about when we're thinking about engagement? What do we think about when we think about representation, the what of learning, and about the action and expression, or the how? So when we think about the why, what, and how does that thinking process suddenly help us create amazing courses that can be delivered in such a way that all our learners can access and take advantage of the learning that we're providing. So what does UDL in practice then look like? Well, what I want to do is, as we launch into this, is go back to Curriculum Design 101. And a number of you may have heard of Backwards by Design, which is really a simple approach to one way you should think about designing your courses, by first thinking about what are the learning objectives for your course that you're designing. Then to think about the assessment. So how are you going to assess those learning objectives? Then think about, well, if you want to be able to assess those learning objectives, what information do learners need to know? What activities do they need to get involved in? What content do you need to deliver to them to give them the knowledge and understanding and skills they need to meet those learning outcomes? And as we think about that design approach, we can start to see where those areas of universal design come into it. For example, when we think about assessment, we're thinking about that how of learning, thinking about how do we get our learners to think or to express what they know in different ways. So what assessment tasks do we start thinking about that's going to draw that out from our learners? And here's a couple of questions that might help you as you think about designing your courses and as you think about the assessments that you're trying to put into place. So here's 4 things to think about. Number 1, what are the opportunities that exist to incorporate multiple means of expression in assessments? What course design decisions can you make to mitigate student anxiety regarding assessments? Thirdly, how might you provide opportunities for feedback? And finally, what choices might you offer students regarding assignments, communication, and content delivery? Again, just a sample of a few questions to think about as you think about the assessment that you're creating, as you think about the how of learning and the different ways to express what these learners have known. So when we think about those questions, what do they look like in practice? And so here I'm going to show you just a short clip of, in OpenLMS, what and we think about that first question, how might we provide opportunities for feedback? Or sorry, the first question rather. What course design decisions can you make to mitigate student anxiety? So here, when we look at our course, one of the things that we can see on the side is it's very easy to see assessment. Students know where to go to get access to their assessment. Furthermore, when they read down the assessment, they get access to more specific information, almost step-by-step instructions about what students need to do, what choices they need to make around the assessment task, how they put the script together, and how they record the presentation that they then create as a result and provide back to the students for peer review. And so we can see here, there's a list of different activities that students get involved in. They're involved with the process to look at some sample videos, to look at what are the best features of putting a good video together. They're involved in making decisions about who do they want to form a part of their group. What's the topic going to be? And so we see there that the way in which assessment has been chunked makes it easier for learners to find. It's very intuitive, and we can see that simple step-by-step approach makes it really easy for our learners to find what they need to do, to be able to not be as anxious because they can see where they need to go for the assessment. They can also see when the assessment's due and what they need to do, whether it's individual work, whether it's group work, whether it's written work, whether it's video. All those things are taken into place as we get students to think about, pick the best way to express what you know. If we move on to the next example here, is where we think about what opportunities do we have within OpenLMS to provide feedback. And here, when a teacher or a trainer is in their course and they set up for an assignment, for example, they can go into feedback types and select some different formats in order to provide feedback in different ways to students, whether that be by comments, whether that be by an annotated PDF, or by a feedback file that gets uploaded. And of course, if there's a rubric associated with this assignment, that's yet again another way feedback can be provided. So again, as we think about OpenLMS, let's have a look at the reality of that. So here we can see is a group presentation. We're now going into the grade area, and we can see from a teacher that they can provide feedback through the rubric. They can go here and add comments. Now, those comments could be added by audio, by video, or by text. They can also add files as well. And in addition to that, they can go over here and very easily add annotation to a PDF file. So again, lots of different ways feedback can be provided to students in a way that they can digest and easily take on that feedback in order to improve their performance as they move forward. So again, a number of different ways that we can address that aspect. Now, the other thing to think about is the choices that students might have. Now, we know that it's really important that when we're putting courses together, that we make the navigation and content consistent, which means that regardless of what course the students are in, they know where to go to get their assessment passed because that assessment language is consistent. They know where to go to get the learning. They can see what topics they need to do in a course, and they can see how a teacher is going or a trainer is going to communicate with them. And so again, it's really, really important that the navigation is consistent, so students get that coherent experience as everything is displayed consistently. And so again, when we look at a course within OpenLMS, here's an example of that consistency, where students are provided with information that's chunked in little bits that they can then go through and do. They can read the introduction. They can partake of the quiz. They can go into the glossary and get access to a number of different references. And once they digest that information, they can then write a reflection piece or record a reflection piece. They can look at different videos. So again, what you can see there is that we're displaying a lot of information. We're providing students a lot of choice in terms of their learning activities and their assessment tasks, some of which are low stakes or medium stakes assessments that students need to undertake. So again, really, really important of how we're doing that. So when we think about the next area around learning activities, again, that's really thinking about the different ways that we're engaging our students. So again, what are the type of questions you should be asking when you think about this? Well, what you should be thinking about is, how do you incorporate different learning activities? How do you provide the variety? Second thing that you should think about is, how might you incorporate learner interaction and collaboration into your course? So how are you getting students and learners actively involved? How are you getting them to work with others? Thirdly, how can you encourage student self-regulation and personal coping skills? And finally, what opportunities exist to incorporate learner choice? So again, let's see how we can do that in OpenLMS. And firstly, we can see that as a trainer or a teacher, we're provided with a range of activities at our disposal that we can use to really provide our students with a variety of learning activities. We can use choice activities to really get a pulse of where students are at in their learning. Or maybe we want to use the choice to help students put them into groups, or choice as a way for students to book time with us as a trainer or a teacher to book in some virtual office time that they can spend with us. Similarly, we might choose to use the database or some interactive content through H5P or the lesson or the SCORM. So there's lots of options we have at our disposal to really make the learning varied for our students, to find different ways to engage them in the learning content, to really get them actively involved. So when they're actively involved and engaged, you're really enriching the learning experience. And really, that's really what we want to achieve as we're designing our courses. But more importantly, we want to do it in such a way that appeals for everyone, so that what we're doing is providing learning for everyone. So again, let's have a look at what that looks like in our OpenLMS course. So here's an example of a course around digital photography. And here we can see that students are giving tasks of various lengths. So here they've given the option to provide some feedback, which is a self-reflection. They're given an opportunity to select particular areas of interest that they want to investigate. They want to share that with the class and share those little information pieces that they find out and display them in such a way that other students are able to digest as part of the learning. And what we can see there is that there's different ways that we make that content available to our students. Again, just a quick way to demonstrate that. The other area we also want to show is something similar. So here we see another video that's really showing how we can help motivate students. So here we can see that students in this course, they've got a current grade of 77. They're 43% of the way through their course. They can see the deadline on the side of assessment tasks that are coming up. And once they're within the course, they can get access of the progress. They can quickly see what they've been able to do, what they've still got left to do. And once they're in a topic, they can jump down and go to immediately where they left off from last time. So from a student perspective, we can see that there's ways that they can go into the course and continue the learning. Students are able to easily see how they're progressing. And again, through the dashboard, they can get a quick snapshot that, hey, I'm almost halfway through the course. My grade is going well. And again, they're all motivating factors to help encourage students to move along as we hit them with different triggers that require them to act, that they then get a reward for. And again, we repeat that process, but the way in which we're creating those triggers, those actions, and those rewards is in a manner that's accessible to all our learners. So again, OpenLMS is a great tool to really help encourage and support accessibility and inclusive education. Now we jump down to the third area when we're thinking about designing courses, which is around providing multiple means of representation, where we're thinking here about the what of learning, and it's around how do we present content and information in different ways. And so what are the questions that we think about at this point? Well, again, here's another 4 that I've put together for you. So what you need to think about here is how can you ensure that the course materials are accessible to all learners? The second thing I would get you to think about is how might you present main course concepts in more than one format? And thirdly, does your course offer opportunities to encourage student agency? And then lastly, how might you informally gauge student understanding of course concepts? So, you know, that's the last of my questions as we've looked at the 3 areas around action and expression, engagement, representation. I've given you 12 areas or questions to think about, which is really important when you're designing courses to deliver to ensure all students can access it. So in reality, what's great about OpenLMS is that within this environment, particularly with any of the, within the Atto editor, you can see here that built in is an accessibility checker as well as a screen reader helper. So these are automatically built in the course. So when you're creating content, it's going to help you ensure that what you're creating is extremely accessible. So again, really, really important to note. Similarly, if you were to jump in and try and add an image, again, the environment reminds you that as you're adding an image, you can write in text or alt text that means or shows that or provides a description for the image that you're uploading or using. So it means that if people are unable to see the image, by the short text that you're putting in here, typically up to 125 characters, you're providing a brief summary of the intent of the image. If the description is longer than that, then it's best to pull that out of the alt tag and put it in the main body of the material, or sitting under the image. So again, you need to think about presenting content in multiple ways, thinking about how all non-text content should be paired with a text alternative. So what do we mean by that? Well, as we've got here, an image should really have some text to help support that. If the image is there for a decorative means, maybe it's there to highlight something or alert a user to something, then you can mark it as a decorative only, and you don't need to write any supporting text for that. Again, other things that you may think about in terms of non-text content should be paired with a text alternative. Another thing to think about would be videos with captions, particularly where they're describing some audio, or it might be the actual audio itself that you need to provide a transcript, or if you're using forms, to make sure that you've got the appropriate labels. And again, they're just some examples of what we mean here. The key thing is accessibility benefits everyone. So that's important. So as we think about what we've just gone through, what do we see as the current challenges being faced by our institutions or corporations, our educators, whether they be teachers or trainers, or by our learners? What are the current challenges you're facing when it comes to accessibility? Just think about that for a moment. What are the current challenges? Well, here's what I've put together based on some of the things that I've seen as I've interacted with perhaps many of you, whether you be there in Asia or here in Australia or perhaps New Zealand or even more globally. Some of the reoccurring challenges that I'm seeing are as follows. Particularly within institutions, the vast amount of course content that's been created. We know that institutions are creating a huge amount of content that they're building, and it means that institutionally it's really difficult to understand where they stand when it comes to accessibility. How much of that content is accessible? How do you get a report to show that, hey, we're on track? The content we're providing, 50%, 80%, 90% of it is very accessible. Currently, institutions are struggling to find that information. What about our educators? These are our trainers and our teachers. Well, for them, it's around lack of awareness and understanding. Our educators are really struggling with the lack of awareness and understanding behind the impact of accessibility. And more importantly, if they realize that there are some issues at stake, or there's some things that they need to rectify or provide content in different ways, some of them are struggling to know how to do that in a timely manner. And so how within institutions do we provide that awareness and understanding? How do we almost provide that in-moment support to our educators that, hey, if you're thinking about adding this content and it's not accessible, how about trying these ideas? And again, institutions are grappling with how can they do that effectively? How do they do that at scale, particularly as we see from COVID, there's a lot of content being rapidly developed and going online. How do we get on top of that? How do we make sure we all have the correct understanding in terms of meeting the needs of accessibility? And then thirdly, what about our learners? Our learners have the potential to fall behind. And some of that is and it could be no fault of their own or no fault of the educators or institutions, but learners have been blocked or delayed in their courses due to the time involved in gaining access to alternate formats. So again, whilst the institution or educators recognise there's a need to provide alternate formats, that can add a bit of a delay that needs to be taken into consideration, or maybe it's a skill set that needs to be looked for to help do that. And so these are three challenges. Again, we've just picked one at an institutional level, one with our educators and one with our learners. But what can we do to address these issues that won't go away quickly? Well, as we've already seen from what I mentioned earlier, that universal design doesn't occur naturally. It means it's something that we've got to learn. It's a skill that you've got to develop, and hopefully webinars like this help raise that awareness around accessibility and give you a number of ideas, a number of things to think about when we're talking about designing for accessibility. And one of the questions that we see here posed is, will the demands of daily instruction allow teachers to function effectively as instructional designers? That is, are teachers the principal stakeholders as they design and deliver instruction in accordance with the UDL principles? Or is that task for developers who make instructional products? So again, what we're seeing in institutions, whose responsibility is it to create the content? Is it the teachers? Is it our learning designers or instructional designers? Who's responsible for ensuring that the courses and the content we're creating are completely accessible for our students? And again, this is something that institutions and corporations are working through as they're making this big digital transformation shift, as they rethink and adapt to this new way of learning, or in fact, many are transforming. And it's working out, how can you do that effectively? How do you do that at scale? What do our teachers need to know? What do our instructional designers or learning designers need to do to ensure that our learning is accessible to everyone? And so we see here that, as we see from this comment, that education, particularly higher education, really need to focus around restructuring the educational experience. And what's pleasing to see is a lot of institutions are well on that way. And as we saw before, a lot are probably in that developing or moving into that third stage, when we had that strategy around accessibility is really great. In fact, there may be a few of you that have already got to that champion stage, which is great, and maybe you should be doing this presentation instead of me. But what's really important, and what institutions and incorporations are starting to realise, is they do need to provide that appropriate support and training, whether it be for those involved in learning and teaching, or those involved in learning and development. And it's really thinking about, how do we carry that out effectively as you think about inclusive pedagogy or andragogy, which is, thinking about those adult principles that you need to use as you're providing or developing amazing learning experiences. And so we know that technology is essential for this sort of implementation. And so the challenge that we see in institutions is, how do you select the right technology and incorporate that and use it well to present content, student learning experience and assessments that increase accessibility engagement for all students. So what are the types of technologies that you use? Well, obviously, all of you would be reaching out to the OpenLMS platform, which has already got a number of these things in place, as I've already demonstrated through this presentation. But again, our OpenLMS platform only goes some of the way. What we can do is we can enhance our technology platform by bringing in other tools like Blackboard Ally, which again is a tool that can be used to improve the student experience, and it also helps institutions and educators. And really, it does it in three ways. In fact, it almost answers those three questions that we posed earlier at that institutional level, because what Ally can do is it provides institutional reports on how much of your learning content is or isn't accessible. What it also does for your educators is that it provides them with some guides, with some in-time help where content isn't accessible. What things could they do to improve that accessibility? So again, it's enabling teachers and trainers to get that in the moment support as they're developing their content. And for students, they now have the ability to download content in different formats on the fly. So students can digest the content in a format that's relatively accessible to them. So it's really personalizing that learning experience for our students and for our learners, whether they be in learning development or around learning and teaching. And I thought I'd just finish just really quickly, just by showing you what I mean by that. As an example of Ally in practice and how it enhances the accessibility that's provided within OpenLMS. So here we see that we've uploaded an image into OpenLMS, which we've done here. And now we're scrolling down, because now that we've downloaded an image, we're also now going to just upload a PDF document as well. So we'll quickly do that. And again, it's just a document around introducing students to digital photography, and we've just uploaded that. And what you'll see there is that little traffic light that's got red on it, that when we click on it, it now provides us with some messaging. Here we can see our image. Here we see it's providing some education to us, some in the moment support for me as an educator, telling me that, hey, my image doesn't have a meaningful description and I need to go in and provide it. In this case, Ally is allowing me to do that within this environment, that I can go in, put in a description that makes is very descriptive. If I'm not sure what that is, I can simply click on what this means or how to write a good description if I need tips. I can save that, and you can see that that score of 25% has now moved on to 100. Similar here with my PDF, I can click. I can see I've only got an accessibility score of 5%. I can jump in and see what this means. I can see what it means to tag a PDF. If I'm not sure, I can go in and see why it's important, and then I can go in and see how I need to do it. and I can follow those steps, and I can do that process. So again, we can see that there are the right technologies available that we can use to ensure that the content, that the learning experience that we're providing for our learners is accessible to all our learners, to everyone. And so as we click on, that pretty much brings this presentation to a conclusion in terms of providing you with a number of things to think about as you look at designing courses that are accessible and beneficial to all learners. So again, there's a bit of time for questions. Okay, so we see a couple of questions coming in. So again, can you suggest tools available that can allow a course to hit all these areas, video, audio, and other interactions all in one offering? Would like to avoid duplications. Absolutely. So again, it really depends on the type of course you're putting together and what you're doing. Are you providing asynchronous content, or are you providing synchronous content? Because again, there's different platforms that you can use that will provide you with auto transcripts on the fly. Again, we have partners like Kaltura that could provide a one-stop shop for that type of information. We have Instilled as another one of our sister companies that could also provide, to some extent, what you're looking for as well. So again, there are a lot of tools available that you can use, that you can integrate with OpenLMS to really ensure that you are just having that one-stop shop in terms of providing some of those things. Correct, Greg. It will raise a lot of these, and certainly questions around that where you've got to go through and look at the different forms of potential disability, whether it be visual, whether it be hearing impairment. These are all things to consider. And for me, having had grandparents who were unable to hear or speak, a lot of this resonates really well with me. And it's a shame that they weren't born 50 years on, where a lot of this technology is there to really support them. That's great feedback. Yeah, so again, you can bring in YouTube to some extent. Some of those, one of the warnings I would have is, as you're using or getting access to a lot of this YouTube content, one of the things I'll be looking for is the videos you're selecting, you know, do they have this text automatically scrolling across them? Are there transcripts that are available? And perhaps if that's not the case, really start thinking about, you know, is that content you need to be using? Or perhaps reach out to the author and see if those things are available. And certainly what we're seeing more and more of is people are becoming more conscious of this, and are certainly using tools that are enabling what's being put on YouTube to be more accessible. Are we able to request support to get a second opinion? Absolutely. I mean, certainly within OpenLMS, there are a lot of technologies that you can use to help provide some quick reviews in terms of what you provided. There are other support areas that can also be provided where people are putting checklists or user guides together of ways in which you can look at your content and check how accessible it is. Other people are actually putting together use cases that they go through and check a number of things before they release that content to their students. And that's really becoming a part of, you know, that quality assurance before courses go out. And certainly it's an area that we're looking into in terms of providing a service that can help institutions put together really good courses that are not only accessible, that are really engaging for learners as well. So certainly reach out, and that's something that we're happy to talk to you more about. The other thing I might also point out in terms of providing that support and help is that on the 2nd of June, we're actually running an online course around accessible and inclusive course design. So again, if what we said today has appealed, has raised the awareness, we'd very much encourage you to jump to that site down the bottom there. Just follow that bit.ly link, and that'll take you to the registration page where you can have a look at the course that we've got here and looking to run on the 2nd of June. So again, just another way that Open LMS is playing our part to help you create accessible content. Okay, so I might leave it there. Thank you all for attending. Hope this has been really, really helpful. And anytime, feel free to reach out, and love to discuss this with you further. So thanks again for attending.